Hi, my name is Hyuntae Choi.
Hi, my name is Marco Jimenez, and we are the hosts of Full Cadence Podcast.
Full Cadence believes in the power of the arts to sustain the human spirit. Through sharing stories of young artists in the performing, visual, and literary arts who are making a difference in their communities, we hope to inspire our listeners to examine how they can use their own talents and unique skill sets to do good.
We also aim to forge a network of artists dedicated to their craft and to advancing issues of social justice, coupled with special episodes exploring the vast world of classical music. Full Cadence ultimately seeks to excite hope and joy in our audience.
If you would like to be featured on this podcast or would like to nominate someone, please feel free to contact us at fullcadencepodcast@gmail.com and follow us on our Facebook page and Instagram, links in the description. Our special guest for this episode is Jenna Cooley. Jenna Cooley is a 17-year-old graduating senior from New Jersey. She's been studying the piano for 12 years under the tutelage of Miss Gloria Chu. She also loves creative writing, with a particular interest in poetry and fiction. She will be attending Brown University in the fall. She loves to play the piano at a local senior center. She is also involved with various choral groups at her high school, both as an accompanist and an alto. In the summer of 2019, she studied at the Boston University Tanglewood Institute, and she has also studied at the Philadelphia International Music Festival and poetry at the Iowa Young Writer Studio. Her poetry, in fact, was selected for the Moving Words Project, an international collaborative project where she worked with Israeli film students. During the course of the project, she participated in workshops and communicated with the other participants to create a final animated short film, which was shown at film festivals in Israel, France, and the United States. Welcome, Jenna Cooley, to Full Cadence.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Hi, Jenna. It's great to have you. How are you doing today?
I'm doing quite well. How are you?
Great, thank you. So Jenna, I know you're a musician and a writer and a poet, and so one thing I was wondering is, to what extent is the way that you approach playing music similar or different to like the way you approach writing?
I think that when I first started writing more, I was approaching it very differently from music because I started writing at a point in my life in middle school when I was sort of rebelling against the piano a little bit. And I was very impatient with this whole idea of trying to stick to the composer's intention. And for me, writing was a way of just like doing what I wanted to. But then slowly as I got to know more about writing and the editing process and how much really goes into a poem, I started seeing the similarities more between the two of them and how they're really both very, very detail-oriented processes and a lot really rises from the details.
What sort of similarities do you see between them?
Well, I know that as a student in both poetry and piano, an issue that I tend to have is that I very much want to impose my own interpretation onto things, like as a reader of poetry, and that tends not to be the best thing to do or the best way to approach it. And the idea that you should be letting an interpretation rise completely from the piece itself and not sort of pushing yourself as a reader or a performer into that. I think that's been a similarity that I did not expect to find because I was frankly hoping that it wouldn't be there. And I guess in terms of creating or performing, it really is a very similar process. Like, granted, when I'm playing a piece of music, I don't compose or improvise, but it is very much still detail-oriented and terribly meticulous, sometimes infuriatingly meticulous to go through.
Right. Well, that's fascinating. I know there's a quote that says something like, if you lock 20 pianists in a room and have them all play the same piece of music, you'll get 20 different pieces of music. So, I mean, I guess there's a fine line between playing what's on the page and then playing what your thoughts are. Okay, so when you approach piano and poetry, I know you say that they're meticulous, detail oriented. Do you have different sources of inspiration when you go down to interpret a piece or write a poem? How does that work?
I tend to write very instinctively and just kind of spew things, like, to be quite frank. I'm not sure if this is a good thing, but when I start writing a poem, I genuinely don't know where it's going, and then it kind of spews, and eventually I have some sort of idea, and then I edit it down extensively to get an idea of what it actually is. Whereas with music, I guess there's a lot more of a logical starting process, and I know that I work a lot more with my teacher because I just write on my own, but we'll talk about history, or like, what was Chopin going through in his life? Why was he so upset about Poland, and that sort of thing. Like drawing on that sort of inspiration and historical background more, of course, for interpreting a piece, whereas a poem is coming from me and is honestly kind of random, and then I cut it down into something that makes sense.
Right.
Do you think that all good poetry has to have a meaning behind it?
This is a difficult question. I think that there should be some sort of intent. I don't necessarily think that it has to have an immediately apparent meaning. Like, I remember that while I was in Iowa, we read quite a lot of more experimental work, and there is one poem called Nothing in That Drawer by Ron Padgett. And the lines are nothing in that drawer, times 14. And I initially was like, I don't understand what to make of this. And it was kind of the first thing I'd been exposed to anything like that. But I think if there's an ultimate intent in it, whatever it is, I think I just strayed from your question. But yes, I think that there should be some sort of ultimate intent, even if it's not necessarily a traditional one.
You know, I could definitely relate to your point that when you're a musician, you have to kind of separate what the composer's intent is and kind of where you want to take it. And there's like a natural tension between what you want to do, the creative liberties that you want to take, and perhaps it being a bit too far.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Nancy, about that, one thing that this reminds me of literary analysis, when like you're reading into literature for meanings that are quite possibly never intended by the author, like when you get deep into symbolism and those sorts of things. So also, Jennas, I know that you had this incredible experience of getting to work on, you know, this animated short film and have this premiered across the globe. So obviously, as you say, both piano and poetry are both pretty almost private, at least to me, and kind of solitary things to do. So before you had the experience with the Moving Words project, did you ever have any other experiences collaborating with other artists or just working with them?
Mostly in the context of workshops or like small, I guess, informal masterclasses with my piano teacher for the piano, but otherwise not very much unless it was like doing a duet with another of her students. And then I guess I had some experience collaborating with people in Iowa because the structure of the program there was that we would have a seminar in the morning and then workshop every afternoon. But that was less creating something collaboratively and more like the editorial process as a group. So prior to that, I guess I hadn't really worked on creating a product together with anyone.
So what was your experience there for the Moving Words project? I mean, I would love to hear what that was like.
It was very interesting. I think there are a lot of things that I wasn't quite expecting because the way it worked was that each individual would write a poem, and then that poem would be sent. We would workshop it like with the other poets, and then it was sent to a film school in Israel. And in that process, it had to get translated, which I completely. I've been interested in the concept of translation, but I guess I had not thought it through properly because, like, I remember talking with the director, and he was cautioning us against using too many abstractions because some words and concepts don't quite translate the same way or don't have a direct equivalent, which is something that I hadn't considered. And it was also kind of a situation where you don't know what people are going to make of your poem, which I had experienced while I was in Iowa, because the way those workshops would work was that that we sat back and could not speak while people were taking apart our poem for the first section. And I just remember sitting there at one point and being like, this is absolutely not what I meant. But I think that's kind of the beauty of it. And so I was lucky enough to have two animators choose my poem, and they created two beautiful and completely different short animated films that they were both things that I would not have imagined at all. And I thought that was fascinating. And it was definitely a bit challenging because I like to have control over my own things. And I was like, I don't know what this person's going to make of it. I was kind of nervous, and I hadn't seen it before the premiere, and I was like, I don't know that I'm okay with someone else having my work. But then seeing it was wonderful.
So after this person made this film based on your work, did it change the way you saw your work in any way?
Absolutely.
Amazing.
They kind of, they read very, very different things into it, both from how I read it and then in the way that the two animators looked at it, which was surprising. And then also just seeing what happened with the other poets' works as well. Like I remember one in particular that like we had discussed in workshop, and the animator's take on it was completely different, like possibly because cultural context differed, and it was really interesting.
So when you did this project, were there any differences in terms of I guess the creative process of, so to speak, young American artists, and then a creative process of artists from around the globe, like perhaps informed by different cultures or backgrounds, or just that sort of thing? Do you notice anything like that?
I'm not entirely sure how the creative process was working for the animation students. I do know that even for the way that we approached editing these poems was a bit different than the way one might edit a poem if you weren't considering the fact that it was going to have to be like it was something that people were going to be working with in translation. And I remember kind of working with the director of the project to sort of sharpen images and remove like abstract language. Like you can't just throw in the word love and expect it to mean the same thing in another language, or like precisely the same thing, especially if in a poem you're already sort of twisting a word or taking it out of its most conventional context.
What was the collaboration film called?
Last Year Past, I think.
And people can find it online, right?
I believe so.
Oh, okay.
So I had a very similar experience of like collaborating, not with film makers, but animators, but with writers at the Young Arts Miami Regional Program. And there we were paired up with a writer, and musicians would kind of create music that would complement the writing and kind of be in conversation with each other. And that was a super cool experience for me because I had never kind of done the interdisciplinary art projects before. Would you like to see more artists kind of go beyond their one discipline or two disciplines per se, and kind of reach out to artists in other disciplines and see what they're doing and have their works complement each other?
I think absolutely. And I think that there's kind of a lot that you can learn about one discipline from the way that you approach things or other people approach things in the other discipline, that it's very valuable, and you kind of get another way of looking at either of the disciplines. And I also think particularly with classical music, it can sometimes become rather insular. Like I know that for me and my life, it's mostly just been myself playing the piano and occasionally interacting with people at a summer program or my piano teachers, other students, but not doing very much with other art forms at all.
When you do collaborate with other students, whether on piano or in other art forms, is there a way in which you feel it's different from doing solo projects or things by yourself? And if so, like what sort of new takeaways, if you will, do you get from that sort of thing?
Well, I'm an enormous control freak sometimes,
Mhm.
by which I mean all the time. And um, I know that for me, when I was working with one of my piano teachers, other students who's a close friend of mine, um, on a piano duo, it was very difficult to both listen to the composer's intention and try to balance what I wanted to do with her and kind of listen to someone that wasn't myself. But I also really love that you kind of like hear what the other person is thinking the piece should be and what you're thinking and kind of find the middle ground. And like
Right, right.
the piece we were playing was a Bach concerto for two keyboards, so it was very intricate, and just kind of hearing from both of us and trying to craft something together was really wonderful. And I think it helped me hear the piece differently as well.
Right. I mean, one thing that's so interesting about Bach is just the amount of artistic liberty you have because of the sparsity of marking. So, I mean, so one thing I might ask is, how do you reconcile what, I guess you said two keyboards, right?
Yeah.
So how do you reconcile what the other pianist wanted to do, what you wanted to do, what your teacher wanted to do, and what was on the score? I mean, how is it that you reconcile these four elements to produce a cohesive vision that made sense to, I guess, the three of you and Bach in the ideal world?
I am not sure I have an answer to that. I mean, I guess we just sort of talked through it and tried not to sort of stomp on Bach's feet, because I have definitely been accused of making Bach sound romantic far too many
Uh,
times in my life. um, and I guess our piano teacher guided us quite a bit, and she likes to have us sort of like sing and follow lines that way, which I think is really helpful. And
oh, I'm sorry.
oh no, sorry, I was just going to say, and we also kind of thought about hearing different parts of the conversation with each other and kind of like playing with the energy or the other person's line in that way, which I think was helpful.
Oh yes. So when you are learning a new piece, what is your process? Is it something that varies from piece to piece, or do you have some sort of method that you tend to apply in general?
I'm a really slow learner, and I absolutely resent learning notes. Like I really just want to get to the next step
Of
all the
course.
time. But I guess just slowly kind of going through from the markings. And I do know that when I was learning the Berg piano sonata, it was like a completely different experience for me, because at the beginning I did not want to play that piece. I listened to it and I had no idea what was happening. And I was like, no, I don't think that this will be a good idea. And so when I started, it was just, I did not have any direction. And like I would normally look for like a melodic line and kind of think about it that way, and I just had nowhere to go. So I was going through with a highlighter, like highlighting motifs, and Berg makes very meticulous markings on everything. Like it's kind of incredible when you look at the score. Like there will be he writes in dynamic markings in each different line, like voice
Hmm.
part, quote unquote. And there was this one section where he was like, um, slow. The tempo markings are very specific. Sometimes he'll write, "Don't rush." It's crazy. So I guess for that one, I really started more with the composer than myself, because I had no idea where to go. And I remember talking to my piano teacher, and she was like, "Well, for this piece, you want to listen more to where the dissonance is leading you." And I was like, "What does that mean?" Um, and things like that.
So on the Berg, I mean, this is a very interesting piece. And one question I might have is, given that it was written in the early 20th century, I mean, did you relate any of these tumultuous upheavals in music and art? Do you try to, and history? I mean, do you try to use any of these elements to inform your interpretation of the piece, or?
Yeah, I remember that while I was at Tanglewood, I was talking to one of my teachers there, and she was like, "Well, you have to keep in mind that this was kind of a time of very rapid change and historical tumult in Europe, and also Berg was very much kind of ahead of his time
Right.
in terms of his approach, and kind of keep in mind all of that like turn of the century tension and turmoil when interpreting it.
Mhm.
Because there was also a time prior to that in me playing the piece where I was kind of making it too romantic and trying to sort of smooth things out a little bit more than I should have been.
To
So
go
do you,
back to your to go back to your point about almost like thinking of melodic lines and singing it. Do you sing or hum when you play the piano?
Yeah, not always, but sometimes when I'm practicing, yeah, like and my piano teacher definitely does it in lessons where she'll have me sing things. I was very embarrassed a couple of weeks ago because I'm learning the Beethoven Sonata 109, and
Oh,
in the
yeah.
third movement there's the variation that's kind of fugal, and I had no idea where the melodic line was for certain parts of it, and she was trying to have me sing it, and I was like, oh wow, turns out I have no idea. And I actually find that to be really helpful, and yeah, we do that, and it also helps me a lot when sometimes I have a tendency to back away from like the where a line is leading, kind of unintentionally. And I think singing kind of helps me to find it more naturally and not back away, which is kind of a terrible habit that I have.
And you're also in active in your choir as an accompanist and an alto. So do you think kind of your experience as a singer how's that also informed your piano playing, and how's your piano playing informed your singing as well?
Um, I like to think about lines in terms of breath. Like, I know for singing, sometimes as an alto, there is a lot of singing the same note and not really getting a melodic line. And kind of our choir director is like, you do know you still have to sing it as line, right? Like, it's not just notes. And just because it sounds like just notes does not mean that you cannot have a direction in the line. And kind of applying that to the piano has been pretty helpful in thinking about like breath and the way it would flow naturally if you sang it, and just kind of hearing it the way like maybe a human voice would sound.
Mhm.
And you've also played the piano at your local senior center. So could you tell us a little bit about your experience? Like, how did you uh, reach out to them, or kind of what was the performance experience like?
So I've done it kind of in two different formats, I guess. I prior to COVID would play each Monday night in the healthcare center at the senior center, and for that it was more of like just a casual, like I was in a corner playing music from like the 20s and 40s 50s era, that the residents were more familiar with, like just during dinner times. And um at that in that part of the facility, people were in a lot of cases either having severe health struggles or struggling with their memory. And it was very moving to me that sometimes it was largely silent, just during dinner times in general. And there were people who would sing with me the entire time because these songs were familiar to them. And like in spite of everything, the music still stuck out to them. And I think that was very powerful. And I have also played, I guess, sort of more formal concerts. Two friends and I organized a concert last fall where we tried to make kind of a overview of time periods in classical music from like the Baroque to the Contemporary, and we made little blurbs and sort of talked about the pieces and tried to highlight things to listen to, like, oh, this is a few, like here's the theme, see if you can kind of hear how it's appearing in the piece and that sort of thing, which I think was also quite interesting because I know that sometimes when I was listening to classical music, especially when I was little at a winner's recital, I just didn't really know what to be listening for. And I was like, oh, this is cool, but I don't know what I'm hearing. So I thought it was interesting to try to make it, I guess, seem more like kind of give people a direction when they were listening to something new that they might not have been as familiar with.
So what was your experience like with going over this I mean, vast swath of history, what I'm guessing 350 years. And how is it like that you, I guess, incorporate some sort of historical elements talking about the background and what are your thoughts anyway about the way that history and music are relate?
It was certainly quite difficult because we also didn't have too much time, and it was in a very busy part of the school year, so we were kind of working with what was already in our existing repertoire. So
Mhm.
it happened to work out quite well that we had people doing Bach, and then we had like Haydn and maybe Mozart, I don't remember. And then we had early Beethoven and late Beethoven. So with that, we were able to talk about how he kind of changed throughout his life, and like by his later sonatas, it's kind of moving away from very, very strict classical form and things like that. And then we were able to talk about Chopin and his life a bit, because someone was playing one of the ballades. And then for the Berg, we were definitely able to talk a bit about how that was groundbreaking for his time, and yeah, things like that, I guess. We were just trying to find common threads that we were able to use to tie things together, because I don't know if it would be possible to truly give that kind of an overview in such little time. So we were looking for both little things to listen to in the pieces and things to say, like, oh, like, remember in this piece before they were doing this thing, and now you can see that this thing is sort of transferred and built on in the next time period. So just trying to find threads like that.
What sort of common threads ran through the pieces that you might have been able to talk about to unify them?
I mean, we certainly looked at form a bit. It was kind of funny. We're like, do you hear these sequences? And looking at that, because I just find that to be kind of an entertaining concept for some reason.
Mhm.
I remember talking about, like, we played the line that was in the fugue for the Bach, and then we looked at how there's the da 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 and the Berg, and kind of how the Berg has lots of almost like fugue-like elements in it. So we were able to kind of look at, like, oh, how counterpoint in one time sort of inspired the way he crafted this piece, and that sort of thing.
Well, I know this is a very broad question, but I am curious. What do you think is the, not so much purpose, but I guess the meaning of art in our time in the 21st century? I mean, I think that there are a lot of different opinions on this, whether, and I'm curious to hear yours.
I think, okay, I'm going to sort of talk about this in terms of a book that was making me think rather differently about it. This year in my English class, as a supplement to something else that we were doing, we ended up reading this book, Understanding Comics, that's about the history of comics and, like, sort of understanding comics as an art form, which is something I had absolutely never thought about, and I, like, had not known anything about comics. And there was one point where the author was looking at the difference between, like, people who put emphasis on form and people who put emphasis on the idea, and, like, art for art's sake versus art to convey a deeper meaning. And I kind of struggle with the concept of art for art's sake. Like, I think ultimately, to me as an individual, it's more important, like, the capacity for art to be a way to make people understand or feel things that they couldn't simply get at verbally is more important than maybe just trying to push form for the sake of that. But I'm sure that that's not necessarily a single correct way of looking at it. That's just kind of what it's meant to me.
No, of course. So I guess what you're saying is that to you the most important thing about art would be to make the listener or viewer or audience member feel differently than before they listen to the piece.
Yes, and I tend to struggle with the idea of creating art that becomes opaque to the people who engage with it. Which I'm sure, like, it is very important to have that kind of experimentation. It's just not, I guess, where I personally want to go with writing or music.
From my experience watching performances, especially of solo pianists, there seems to be a movement from kind of relying on the program notes for the audience to kind of interpret or kind of to know what to listen for. And that's kind of slowly moving towards the performer themselves saying like, this is what you this is kind of some historical context and giving some background to the piece verbally. And I think that is a common thread that I see. And what you're saying is that you want to make sure that the audience understands the music too. And the role of an artist is to convey that art or that music faithfully.
Yeah, I think that that's wonderful how it's kind of become something that you're really kind of talking to the audience about and almost engaging them more actively. I think that that's a wonderful thing.
Well, I think this has been a great discussion.
I agree. Thank you very much. I've enjoyed it.
Yes, thank you so much. This is amazing.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you guys for having me.
So you can find Jenna Cooley if you want to talk to her after the show at _Jenna Cooley on Instagram. And signing off, this is Full Cadence. You can follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and feel free to contact us via fullcadencepodcast@gmail.com.